Welcome to PWE Music. I'm Dr. Patrick Engler, and today we'll be continuing our solo series on Henri Rabaud's Solo de Concours. Today we'll be going on to the Allegro section, and because this section is a little bit longer, I'm going to split it into two different parts. So we'll be starting with the first half of this Allegro section, measures 60 to 146, or the start of the Allegro until the 8-measure D sharp trill. Let's get to it. In doing a quick scan of this section, we'll notice that in comparison to what we'll be looking at in the next video, this section features a little bit more melodic lines, some simpler melodies. It's mainly just quarter notes and eighth notes that we're dealing with here, nothing too crazy or flashy technique-wise. And so the temptation when we see something like this and we see Allegro is we want to go really fast and push it ahead. And while that might be exciting, we do want to keep an eye out for what is yet to come and some of the technical things in this section. So just make sure you don't go too fast. Okay? Leave some in reserve for when the fingers really need to start flying. Because this section features some simpler melodies and doesn't have the same flashy technique that might help propel us forward, we always want to make sure we're aiming to keep this section flowing. And so what will help make that happen is think of the eighth notes going to the next thing rather than being connected to the thing before. So in a lot of situations we have two eighth notes on beat 2. We want to connect those to the next measure rather than the thing before them. So lead into the next thing. And this might be a little bit counterintuitive because in many cases they're tied over to the thing before it. We have the bar line that kind of tricks us into thinking of what the combinations are. But those eighth notes will always lead to the next thing. And if we can get that feel, that'll help keep us moving forward, keep that forward momentum that we might otherwise be lacking with the simpler melodies and the lack of technical work here. Going along with the idea of keeping the section flowing, we have a couple examples of entrances on higher altissimo notes and entrances with an accent. And in both cases, we want to work to make sure that these fit within the style. They aren't too bombastic of an entrance for the line. So for the accents, we want to think of it more of like a soft shove rather than a hit. So we can use a little bit more of our breath to help accent these. I would even go so far as to think more of a tenuto rather than an accent. So that way we avoid the hard ta attack that we might be a little too hard for the line. With these higher notes, we also want to make sure that we're not pinching and squeezing too much, make them really pop. Stay relaxed, let the air do the work, and work on our voicing to make sure they fit within the line. Now, while I've made the point that this section features some simpler melodies, maybe not as much technical work, there are still some 16th note runs in here. And as I'll say with any other time we have a technique like this, we want to make it as clear as possible. We really want to work to hear every note in these runs. And here it's especially important because we're going from melodies that are pretty clear to hear, the quarter notes and eighth notes. We should hear every note. And then to have a 16th note run that's smeared and a little bit messy in comparison is really going to stand out. So really work to not rush going into these things and work to make the fingers nice and clear and crisp when we're going through these runs. And one that I'd like to point out is measure 98, where we have a C sharp down to a B and up to a D. This one is a little bit trickier than the others. The others generally fall into arpeggio patterns that are a little more familiar. This one, because we're switching from left to right and back to left with the pinky, this one might be a little bit hard to line up and get clean. So just as a note to flag this one for maybe a little extra attention. Finally, I'd like to point out one of the pitfalls that I've heard many times with this piece, and that is the D sharp trill at the end of this section. So make sure that you give this at least a few minutes of your time before you go and perform it. Just get in the habit of counting it and playing it the whole way through. You just gloss over it as, oh, it's just a half note for 8 measures that I sit on and trill. You won't have the right mindset of counting through it and keeping your place once you get to that performance, especially once the pressure's on. So just make sure you give it a couple minutes of your time. Doesn't need to be a whole practice session, but make sure that you get in the habit of counting it and you know how long it should be. That about does it for our first look at the Allegro of Rabaud's Solo de Concours. As I said before, we'll be going on to the last page in the next video. This just covered measures 60 to 146, so stay tuned for the conclusion. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.